10 most hated bands. Number 10, Kiss. Yes, Kiss has gotten a lot of flack, and granted, while they're considered to be one of the best rock bands ever, equally they polarized so many people against them, and especially with that schlock that they had put out in the 80s. Some of that stuff is so unlistenable that it will actually make your stomach turn, because you're guaranteed to toss your cookies at first listen within a couple seconds. Their earlier work was really good. Cold Gin was awesome, and Strutter, and some of those other songs, but they really got away from that in the 80s, and that definitely brought in a lot of haters. Number 9, Nirvana, the anti-rock band. Kurt Cobain was, in his day, really the anti-guitarist as well. He would purposely do out-of-tune guitar solos. And while people like me got a huge kick out of it, a lot of people did not find the humor in it whatsoever. But that's the thing. Kurt Cobain just didn't give a crap. And it really showed oftentimes in a lot of their performances. But yet at the same time, somehow he was always able to rally and do something that the masses would just love. Story has it, though, that it was hard to pin Kurt Cobain down and actually get a decent take from him in the studio. They said it was like pulling teeth. But you figure a lot of people who were into the 80s hair rock bands, like myself, all of a sudden saw their demise when this Nirvana band comes along and just simplifies everything right down. And the birth of grunge comes, which really we saw as kind of uneventful. Like, well, okay, now they're back to just strumming straight up rock and roll, and it's kind of boring. But at the same time, what Nirvana actually introduced to music is a sense of honesty and a bit more of an organic approach in production. So good things did come from Nirvana. Still though, ask any true rocker or metalhead, and a lot of them do not revere Kurt or Nirvana that much at all. 8, Guns N' Roses. Now when Guns N' Roses first hit the scene with Appetite for Destruction, people were blown away by how sleazy this band sounded. They're like the band your mama warned you about. You had this crazy singer who was singing these high notes, and then he could turn around and go, "We've been dancing with Mr. Brownstone." I mean, talk about a sound. The guitars were cutting like razors. They weren't metal, and yet they weren't 80s hard rock either. They had this sort of strange razor cutting edge, almost kind of a punk mixed with a hard rock type sound, and nobody could really pin Guns N' Roses down because they actually had kind of a mixture of punk and hard rock. But of course, Axl Rose definitely helped to make the band very hateable, especially as time went on. Axl came up with all these wacky lyrics that definitely did not stand the test of time, especially through Use Your Illusion. And then he just completely recorded himself into a corner with Chinese Democracy, taking many years to complete this album because he was just too much of a perfectionist, which was really ticking fans off. So fans and detractors alike really got tired of Axl's antics. And that right there is definitely a bona fide reason as to why Guns N' Roses makes the list. 7, Green Day. Any good punk band should have the inherent talent of basically saying off. And Green Day actually did that to punk fans. So they started off with much more of a punk approach to things, and before long, they're doing Time of Your Life and all sorts of more commercial sounding songs. And their fan base just completely got turned off by it. But Green Day is a hit pumping machine. Billy Joe could go off on a crowd like the best of them, and hence Green Day makes the list. 6, Metallica. There is no doubt that Metallica has definitely garnered some hate over the decades. Like Guns N' Roses, Metallica started off as the band your mama warned you about. They were just heavy, came out of nowhere, had their own sound, but were also able to appeal to wider audiences than other heavy bands during that era. And of course, Metallica started finding a lot of success by that. The loss of Cliff Burton, that was absolutely tragic, coming right on the heels of a breakthrough album, Master of Puppets. And then they soldiered on and did a fantastic job with And Justice for All, which to me is arguably one of their best sonically produced albums. But you're going to have people on both sides of that argument. Then after that, they came out with their Black Album, and all of a sudden now they're starting to sound more accessible. And more Metallica started doing this with Load. And then when they came out with Saint Anger, and all of a sudden it sounded like the drums were just a bunch of garbage cans being smacked on, Metallica had lost their whole essence. And yes, while they are one of the biggest bands of all time, poor Kirk Hammett is always taking flack for having to use the wah-wah pedal on everything, but he was trying to find that sound. You go back to Enter Sandman. His guitar solo, on what's probably the biggest hit ever, was done with the wah, and Kurt just had to run with it. Another reason why Metallica was so hated, of course, was the whole Napster thing, because this band is metal. They stand for some form of rebellion, but now all of a sudden they're standing for a form of commerce versus the listeners who wanted to download free music. So that became a big deal right there. Metallica lost a lot of fans in that move, but they ushered in much more variation in the music licenses that we are seeing nowadays. So something came out of it. Number 5, U2. U2 definitely makes the list, and rightly so. The music is often monotonous and meandering, and yes, the Edge likes his delay pedal just as much as Kirk Hammett likes his wah pedal, but the band is so highly predictable. Like Metallica, U2 had become so mainstream that you could almost see that they were just flush with money, and that kind of lost the rock band edge as well. U2 just wasn't cool. They seem now much more like a band that a suburban family would want to listen to on the fireplace while they're enjoying a nice dinner. And that's pretty much U2 in a nutshell. 4, the Dave Matthews Band. When the Dave Matthews Band hit the scene, they had a totally different sound going on, some very catchy hooks, very high levels of musicianship. I mean, their drummer, Carter Buford, is out of this world. A lot of people, though, had a hard time getting into them. I mean, it was such a big band, there were so many players in it, and they never seemed like they were quite sure if they were a folk band or a rock band. So it was always this kind of strange mix of the two music that just never quite blended. Almost like ketchup on a peanut butter sandwich, you know? It just kind of sort of didn't work. However, what is cool about the Dave Matthews Band is that they were well established before they even got their record deal, which meant that by the time they were approached by the labels, because they had gotten that big on their own grassroots, they were pretty much able to say, hey, well, what are you going to do for us? We're going to keep all the publishing rights and we're going to do all that. Dave Matthews and the band had a good level of control over their entire career because of the fact that they were able to build up such a huge grassroots following before getting picked up by a label. So props to them. Nevertheless, their sense of musical direction was kind of all over the place, and so they ended up making the list, which brings us to band number 3, Pearl Jam. Yes, there I said it, Pearl Jam. They hit the scene as grunge was at its apex, and Eddie Vedder had the perfect vocal sound for this music that they called grunge. It totally fit. The band did a lot of straight-up rock sounds. Even flow almost had kind of a Jimi Hendrix Voodoo Child vibe going on. So the band was definitely well on its way towards worldwide popularity. But at the same time, Eddie Vedder's voice got old after a while to a lot of listeners. Pearl Jam generally tend to do kind of the same things over and over again, so it did get a bit old as well. And of course, with them being in the grunge crowd, a lot of the displaced metalheads or 80s hairband metalheads of the day also didn't exactly care for them either. Though a lot of them actually did take really well to Alice in Chains, so go figure. But the long and short of it is, it was as if Pearl Jam was taking away from a lot of the good bands in that era that should have gotten more props, like Alice in Chains. Number 2, Limp Bizkit. Did it all for the nook. They are basically the kings of jock rock. Rap metal, where one must show their abs in every single video, it was doomed from the very start. Nobody was going to want this crap. And this genre of music, this new metal, rap metal, people were already looking to turn it at cringe as soon as they possibly could. And there were some good elements to it. I mean, it had groove, which is great. It had power. It had some of the elements from rap that made rap so good. But for some reason, the whole roided out jock thing just killed the genre. And Fred Durst and the group were totally behind that. Heck, Eddie Van Halen actually pulled a gun on Fred Durst, if that tells you anything. So apparently he even got under Eddie's skin as well. And that's what makes Limp Bizkit fall number 2 on the list. Finally, the most hated band, and every single one of these band lists you might come across will have the same name, Nickelback. Nickelback became so big, and the thing about them is that they just used like almost a stamp for the formulaic approach to their songwriting. And a lot of people can't stand seeing a band pretty much effortlessly getting success after success after success at such a small price of just basically taking the same song and reworking it over and over and over again. This isn't like AC/DC. You know, AC/DC had something special and unique. Nickelback really didn't possess that. So essentially, they are a one-song band, and people just got tired of it. They didn't want to hear about Nickelback. Just everywhere you look, there was Nickelback. Props to them. I mean, they got great success, and they were able to just ride that success train like a good Canadian band. But to this day, they are definitely the most hated band of all time. Now I'm going to open up that comment section down here below. Make sure you kindly like and subscribe and throw down some bands there that I probably have missed. Because again, this is a top 10 list, so I'm sure that some of you will actually play some other bands in areas right around there. So by all means, leave it in the comment section. Thanks for subscribing. You are now in the family.